So there is a whole movement that is recognized as a freedom movement in Kashmir, in the Valley of Kashmir. Of course, Kashmir is more than that. It's Jammu and Kashmir, now the Union Territory, and earlier it was Ladakh, Jammu and Kashmir. But there is a prevalent view in the West that it is a religious, it's a freedom movement, and that Indian state is inflicting a lot of torture on the local habitants of Kashmir Valley. Um, but hearing your sort of view, one understands that it was almost, does it feel like it was a planned way of changing the demography of Kashmir Valley? What would your sort of response be to the Western sort of understanding of what is going on in the Kashmir Valley?
See, at that time, India was not considered to be as a very good friend of the West or United States of America. So more or less, India around that period of time was not considered to be a Western ally or an American ally or an American friend or Western friend. And the moment, the separatist movement, religious separatist movement, they had this thing in mind at that point of time also. So for different reasons, Western countries, United States of America, for different reasons, they would be sympathetic to the separatist movement, whatever its ideological motivations in J&K state. So that was one of the reasons that they ignored the West and the rest of the world ignored the ideological content of this movement. But I can tell you there have been 4 or 5 variants of separatism in Kashmir. One was restoring the Article 370 in its pristine purity, restoration of Article 370, which subsequently took the name of restoring the greater autonomy of J&K state. Subsequently, the names like self-rule, they also started. So there was one thing, that restoring the separate character of J&K state in its pristine form, which meant that J&K state had exceeded primarily on 3 subjects: defense, foreign affairs, and communications. So only on these 3 subjects the writ of India will run, and rest will be governed by the local constitution, the constitution of the state. So this was the moment for restoration of Article 370, or what they used to call greater autonomy. And then its variant was self-rule, which was subsequently proclaimed by the regional party, another regional party which came into existence during last 3 decades, that was PDP, People's Democratic Party. And then there was a moment for independence of Kashmir from Jammu and from India. So they would say that they would not be part of India, but they would be an independent country. Another was clearly the moment for the merger of Jammu and Kashmir with Pakistan. And along with...
We seem to have lost Dr. Saab's connection momentarily. I apologize to the audience. I think there must be some connection issues. We'll just be back in survival a second. Has been. Dr. Saab, welcome back again. I believe the electricity has, the connection has come back.
Yes.
So to all our friends who are patiently watching, I apologize for this snag. But Dr. Saab is based out of Jammu, and in India, power cuts are still very common. We may not recognize it here that often in the UK, but we deal with all of those situations. And Dr. Saab, thank you. We were talking about how, the West perceives the whole concept of what has happened in what is going on in Kashmir. As you must have read also, and you must have heard, a lot of misinformation goes on here. And there's a lot of questions asked about the atrocities on the people living in Kashmir. I'll actually, before we actually go into details of what has gone on, I'd like to ask you what the understanding of genocide is, because the world does recognize genocide. There are genocidal laws, but the Hindus' exodus has not been recognized as genocide. So if you respond to both in together, Dr. Saab.
Yes, where I cut off with you, I want to tell you that entire spectrum of separatist demands, if you just examine them, they are not talking about freedoms. They are talking about a religious state.
Mhm.
Now, even the so-called moderate demands like uh, um, greater autonomy or self-rule, if you see all those documentations, they are not talking about the freedoms which a mankind should have. They're not talking about that. They're talking about something else.
Mhm.
What has happened is, on one side, there was this relentless campaign, a selective campaign which was going from the separatist side, from the Pakistan. On the other side, there was almost a self-imposed a moratorium of not contesting the separatism, which was pursued by the government of India. Now, it is in this vicious situation, the actual pulse of the moment, ideological pulse of the moment, it was lost on the world. And um, it is because of that, when the genocide took place, uh, it didn't get recognized globally. The type of an effort which was to be made by the government of India at that point of time, because it was a separatist war being unleashed on the nation of India at that point of time. It didn't happen. We, as the victim community, were caught up on one side, the genocidal forces; on the other side, a policy which was based on denial of genocide. And we had to craft a survival struggle within these two processes. And we, within our limited resources, did try to. It was gradually the international organizations started recognizing that, and the terrorist violence, it has a jihadi nature. They started recognizing that, and they are also committing atrocities against the civilians. But with the type of force they should have been brought before the world, it was not done. And there were definite political reasons for that. So what I'm trying to say is that we were face to face with two monumental processes. One process was the genocide, in which the separatist terrorist regimes were involved, in which the communalized social setup of Kashmir Valley was involved, and behind them was the Pakistan. On the other side was the Indian state, which wanted to somehow hush it up. They wanted to insulate rest of India from the happenings in Jain state.
Mhm.
So at that point of time, to hide things was a strategic objective of the separatists, and to hide things was a tactical objective of the state of India. This type of a viciousness was there, and which still is in a larger part existing in the, so far as handling the JNK issue is concerned, is still existing. So um, we were caught up in this type of a vicious situation.
Hmm. So the genocide, there are genocide covenants. Will you, because the world has seen many tragedies, where genocide has taken place. I mean, the world has witnessed world wars. The world has witnessed various such. I mean, the Jewish Holocaust has been much talked about, and there are punishments. In India, also partition. The world has witnessed partition, which has been a genocide. But is there any way that genocidal crimes have been punished in India? And is India a signatory to the UN Convention? Would you take us through that sort of aspect of the legality?
You see, in fact, in 1948, the Convention on Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide was adopted by United Nations. Government of India was one of the proposers. They were one of the main countries whose role became critical when this convention was adopted. And by virtue of this convention itself, it was a responsibility on Government of India itself to ultimately create the commensurate laws in India itself, which will take cognizance of the crime of genocide and then prevent it, create measures to prevent it, and punish the crime of genocide. This was ratified in the Indian Parliament, I think, in 1958-59. This was ratified, and subsequently the law which was to be made, there was a procrastination. They didn't move ahead in that direction. Now, when you talk about Holocaust, you are basically talking about creation of a country through the process of genocide. The partition of India was creation of Pakistan, and inherent in this creation was the genocide of the people. So Pakistan was created through a process of unleashing genocide on the Indian people. People were caught up on that side, people were caught up on this side. And the most tragic aspect was the non-Muslims who were caught up on that side, who could not leave in time, and who were caught up in the Pakistan. At that time, Pakistan was East Pakistan and the West Pakistan. People say it was almost 23%, and some say it was almost 27% of the population at that point of time. So we're talking about millions of non-Muslims caught up on that side. Since Indian nation, immediately after the partition, they took up the line that they do not want to create a religious state. They do not want to create a state on the basis of religion. India would be a secular country where everybody will live on the principle of equality. So by that rationale, at that point of time, the population of Muslims became constitutionally, or were supposed to be the constitutionally equal citizens of India. They did not have a problem. But Pakistan was becoming a religious state where they had to be second-class citizens. Citizens who would be targeted legitimately by the proselytizing forces. If they convert, okay. If they don't convert, they'll be legitimate targets of the physical attrition of a destructive process, which Pakistani state, the state of Pakistan, would not be able to obstruct, because Pakistan was a Muslim state, and proselytization and converting, becoming a Muslim, in that it was not a crime. So it was in this situation, partition did not only unleash genocide, it created an impending genocidal attrition for the people, non-Muslims who were left there. At that point of time, Indian leaders, Nehru, and on the other side, Liaquat Ali Khan, they started talking about to stop that tragedy, that the bloodshed of partition. They talked and they said that let the Hindus who are now in Pakistan remain in Pakistan, and the Muslims who are in India, they remain in India. And both these minorities will constitute strategic minorities. In fact, their presence in each country will be a deterrence against violence against them in each country. Say, for example, if there are Hindus living in Pakistan and Muslims living in India, then if something happens in Pakistan to the Hindus, then automatically the insecurity of the, say, Muslims in India will rise. So they will, their insecurities or their survivals will ultimately act as a deterrence and will be able to create peace. It was this concept of strategically hostaging the minorities in each state. It was a disastrous decision, because Pakistan was a committed religious state and India was a committed secular state. In a secular state, the Muslims will be automatically get the protection, and rightly they had to get the protection. But on the other side, we were basically, through this concept, handing over the non-Muslims to the Muslim establishment, to the Muslim order, for eventual proselytization or destruction. And that's exactly what happened. So partition was a genocide. It was a genocidal outcome of a genocidal campaign. Then it did not stop right there after the partition was completed. It led to the continuous genocide of Hindus and non-Muslims on the other side. And then immediately after the partition, we had the genocide of Hindus of Pak-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Nobody talked about it. In fact, when we are talking about genocide, we are talking about almost a 1,000 years old genocidal war going on specifically against Hindus. And it's unfortunate that Hindus are yet to recognize that a war is on, unimpending, unobstructed, relentless, long protracted war against Hindus. It's on. It attained its own momentum around the time of partition, but it did not abate with partition. It continued to be inflicted upon the Hindus living in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh. Then it started on this side, gradually started building up to a genocidal campaign in J&K state. And in 1990, it reached that crescendo when this genocide, the genocidal war ultimately started taking place on the very territory of secular India. So we are talking about something very, very monumental, something many times bigger than the Holocaust of the Second World War, something very bigger than even the Armenian genocide. And most important to note is that on one side, the state of India denied it. On the other side, the Hindus also denied it for a long, long, long period. Hindus had different reasons, and the state of India had different reasons. Now, what reason state of India had to deny it? State of India visualized secularism, ultimately a function, a responsibility of only the Hindus of India. It didn't visualize secularism as a function of the secular polities of different communities who valued right to equality and coexistence as a prime value, so that a forward moment could be made in the nation building. Indian state created a secularism which was incremental, gradual accommodation with Muslim identity and Christian identity politics. So it was based on a principle in which they said that a democratic secular country, the secularism is the responsibility of a majority. So in a democratic country, they have to prevent the tyranny of majority. And if they are able to prevent the tyranny of majority, they would be able to ultimately create a secular society. They did not recognize that minority movements can be essentially ideologically communal, and they have also to be addressed. Particularly, communal ideological moments within the minorities who do not consider themselves as minorities, who think they are a part of a larger fraternity of people, a larger ummah. So this flaw of ultimately putting the entire onus of responsibility of creating a secular society was kept on the Hindus, and the non-Muslims, particularly the Muslims, were given an impression that the secularism means accommodation with the Muslim identity politics or religious identity politics. Now, in this atmosphere, while Indian state did everything to prevent the tyranny of majority in rest of India, in J&K state, when it accepted the special status of J&K state, it accepted that tyranny of majority in a Muslim majority J&K state is acceptable, and it is the function of secularism itself. So it was in this type of a contradiction, which I call a cardinal contradiction, the nation was caught up. And Indian state would hide Muslim communalism. Indian political class would hide it, rationalize it, give meaning to it, and bloat out of proportion any act which would happen on the side of the Hindu majority. So a politics evolved in which one community was permanently guilty and another community was permanently a potential victim. So it was in this type of a vicious cycle that India was caught up, and India is still caught up. And in Kashmir, government of India ignored or denied the genocide, not for the same reasons for which the genocide was denied so far as Armenia is concerned. Armenian genocide, denial of Armenian genocide is one of the major issues. It is quoted as an example. There are many denial processes. Now, in the case of Armenia, people would say that West started looking the other way even Israel and the country of Israel started looking other way, because a new world order after the Second World War was cast. And in that new world order, West had emerged as a prominent and an eminent power of the world. And they would like this now the situation to be stabilized. Even Israelis who were in search of having stable diplomatic relations with Turkey, they would also think that perhaps they would have not to give so much of importance to the denial of the genocide of Armenians, and they would somehow close their eyes to it. There was a strategic or a strategic reason for that denial. But in India, there was no strategic reason. It suited Indian state to tell the world that there is no freedom movement in Kashmir. It is a moment for the destruction of freedom. It suited Indian state strategically to tell the world that in spite of having the greatest amount of autonomy within the states of India, J&K state, there is still alienation. They didn't tell the world that. They didn't try to engage world on that. They didn't try to world that there was a small minority of, say, 6%, which was not being welcomed there. And the moment, so-called freedom moment, it was intolerant. It got unleashed with the religious cleansing of the Hindus there. He didn't want to tell them that, because Indian state had this vision of ultimately trying to adjust and accommodate Muslim communalism. And they took it to the level when this whole wish of trying to somehow accommodating Muslim communalism to the extent of neutralizing the very basis of Indian nationhood. This became such a malady, and this is such a malady even now, that it will threaten the very integration of India in the coming days. So what you are saying, that it was not a strategic reason, it was more or less a wish, a suicidal wish to hope that we will go on accommodating, we will not contest, we'll try to tell the other side that there are legitimate reasons why you are alienated. There are legitimate reasons why you are expressing your politics in terms of in religious terms. There are secular reasons for your say communal estrangement, or secular reasons for communal alienation. So fudging it became a psychological attitude, and in fact it became the core of a subversive process which has taken grip within India. And you will find this deterrence, this avoidance, this escape reaction even now. Shaheen Bagh is the latest example of this whole process. It is a psychological malady Indian political class is suffering from. It thinks that they can circumvent Muslim communalism and they don't have to contest it. And they can create secularism through the root of Muslim communalism. And in J&K state, they can create nationalism through the root of halfway separatism. So they don't have to patronize nationalists in J&K state. They have to patronize halfway separatists. They don't have to patronize and stand by the secularists in J&K state. They have to stand by the Muslim communists there. And that will create secularism and nationalism there. So the basic structure of the thinking of the Indian state is the structure where the blame will come upon them. The other side is constantly hitting them, and they are constantly doing things to take the blame, hoping that the world fraternity will realize that ultimately India is so accommodative, and the world at large will realize that Muslims somehow have to be persuaded from their side to ultimately adopt a politics which is more accommodative. So you are seeing a politics of suicide. It is still continuing. So Kashmiri Hindu genocide was denied for these reasons. They didn't want to see, they didn't want to prevent it. They didn't want to educate the world about it. And they wanted to insulate the Indian public opinion of what had happened, because essentially a communal experiment in J&K state, which the state of India wanted to project as the pinnacle of, say, secularism, that had failed. And they wanted to stop people from India, stop the people of India from knowing it, that experiment had failed. And they are still doing it.
So there are various problems here. There is obviously the genocide that happened, but then obviously you've talked about how, in a planned way, there has been a planned denial of the genocide. Now, my question to you simply is in the context of, I believe the Panun Kashmir team have actually drafted, after the Margdarshan document, there is another piece of work that you have done, and you've led that campaign together with Dr. Agnishekhar, is the Hindu Genocide and Atrocities Prevention Bill. Is that your response or presentation to the government of India to have genocidal crime punishment laws in India?
I'll come to that, but first I'll place. Uh, Government of India called it as migration.
Hmm.
So in the official parlance, we are migrants. Now it is the worst expression of denial of genocide. So they kept in mind that somehow we create some camps, we create some facilities, but the very destitution and the very misery in exile will force this community to go back and live within a Muslim order, live within a territory where already where there is a total Islamization, but there's a total intolerance ruling. They thought if through destitution we can push them back, our problem is over. We can proclaim to the world that secularism has returned to the valley. Our thrust from the very beginning was what happened in Kashmir is a classical example of genocide. You see, if you go to the definition of genocide, it has 5 parts: killing the members of a community, giving them bodily and the mental harm, and then creating conditions for the destruction of that group or community, then shifting the children to the other group, or preventing the births. Out of these 5 definitions, 5 cardinal, say, and these yardsticks in the definition of genocide, 3 are getting fulfilled with regard to the first 3. All the 3 things have happened, and you don't need all the 5 to be fulfilled. You need just one, one condition which you can prove, and that this thing has happened. So, from every angle, and what happened to the Hindus of Kashmir was a genocide. Indian state was calling it as a migration. It was a denial of genocide. But now one good thing has happened, that when the present government in Delhi, they banned Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front and Hizbul Mujahideen and Jamaat Islam. And while banning it, they explained it that Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front was banned because it was responsible for the genocide of Kashmir.